only see black and white. Dems exploiting Buffalo horror as it did George Floyd. You know, that's their go-to move. They race bait, they race bait, they race bait. Because that's all they have. Because if you look at the policies that they enact, no one would actually vote for this stuff. So they have to race bait. That's the only thing they have. And only seeing things in black and white. I talk to my clients about this all the time. That is nuance to things. Things aren't only in black and white. They need to stop seeing things in black and white because that causes anxiety, that causes depression, that causes resentment, guilt, a whole host of other things. And that's what the Democrats do. They use those emotions against you to try to get you to vote for them because that's all they have. Like, again, they can't they can't base anything on policy because their policies are terrible. But before we get started, go ahead, hit that like button, share this out so we can get this information out there. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and hit that alarm bell so you know when I'm putting out new stuff. Also, check out my link tree in the description. It has a link to my Patreon where I talk about things I can't talk about here. There's also a link to my merch store where I have Let's Go Brandon t-shirts, I Will Not Comply t-shirts. Check all those out. And there's also a link to my mental health coaching and consultation page. Whereas if you are someone that's suffering from anxiety and depression, especially from all the negative news and the stuff that's going on around the world, you can set up a session where I can coach you, I can teach you how to manage those issues, teach you coping skills. So check that out also. All right, let's talk about this news. What connects the tragedies of May 25th, 2020 and May 14, 2022? The straightforward answer, at least according to many in the media and on the left, is systematic racism. They keep playing these victim games. They keep playing this stuff. But on May 25th, 2020, a black man was murdered in Minneapolis by a white police officer. The incident was filmed by onlookers and posted on social media. Suddenly, the whole world could see what American racism looked like. It was devoid of compassion. It was deadly. It cloaked itself in a white man's uniform. 2 years later, almost to the day, there was a mass shooting at a grocery store in Buffalo. 13 people were hit, 10 were killed, 11 of the victims were black, and the suspect killer is white. Racism almost certainly explains the attack in Buffalo. Peyton S. Gendron, the subject who broadcast a live stream during the attack, claimed he had been plotting an ambush since January. Police has since revealed that he is not from Buffalo and that he traveled for 3.5 hours to the supermarket, which sits in the zip code with the highest proportion of blacks in upstate New York. Officials are investigating a manifesto he allegedly wrote in which the author describes himself as a fascist, a white supremacist, and an anti-Semite. On the Saturday the shooting took place, um, there was a conference that was going on by a range of distinguished African Americans, ranging from Glenn Laurie to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The key question that was addressed was, what is holding back Black America? It quickly became clear, had little to do with the phantom systematic racism. They blame systematic racism for everything, but I'm gonna be honest with you, systematic racism, or what they call it, have never stopped me from doing anything. No white man came down and ever said to me, no, you can't get your degrees, no, you can't be a therapist. No one, systematic racism never stopped me from doing anything. But we started by acknowledging, they started by acknowledging the huge progress that blacks in America have made since desegregation in 1964. Then they had a black president who won by landslide elections and remains popular. We also have two black Supreme Court justices. We have black billionaires, academics, media personalities, actors, comedians. I mean, you name it. None of which is to say that America is any sort of utopia for black Americans. We also acknowledge the racial disparity in education, housing, crime, broken families. We express horror that while blacks make up only 12% of the population, they account for 55% of homicide cases. And a lot of that can be blamed on culture, but what explains this disproportionate representation of black Americans, taken into isolation, the tragedies in Minneapolis and Buffalo appear to suggest that the answer lies in the behavior of racist police officers and white supremacists. Given the nature of the atrocities, perhaps this conclusion is inevitable. What happened in Buffalo, for instance, can only be described as horrific. The cold, calculating shooting, the loss of life, the heinous views of the suspected shooter. How can we view such an atrocity and not let it overwhelm our judgment? How can we not conclude that such evil merits nothing sort of societal change? Yet, if the past 2 years have taught us anything, it is the causal explanations are almost always misguided, and as a consequence, almost always end up harming the vulnerable. As the Black Lives Matter movement mobilized following the murder of George Floyd, America descended into anarchy, fueled by riots and slogans about systematic racism. When activists demanded that the police department be defunded, local stations were not exactly closed down, but they were intimidated to the point that many stopped serving in the black communities. The consequences of this swiftly became evident. In the same year that BLM fever seized the country, at least 8,600 black lives were lost to homicide, an increase of more than 1,000 on the year before. Thrown into a frenzy by the overzealous conviction that a white racism is the root cause of all evil, BLM turned a blind eye to the large number of black Americans who were being killed or found themselves forced to live in neighborhoods terrorized by gangs. And I will also add the disproportionate amount of abortions. Like I remember years ago in New York City, more black babies was being aborted than were being born. I mean, this is just ridiculous, outrageous, and we all know that abortion clinics, 80% of abortion clinics are in black neighborhoods. We know about that's the real black genocide that's going on that BLM does not discuss at all. But there were no protests or demands for meaningful policies to make black neighborhoods safer. Rather, the movement organizers busied themselves by throwing parties at their $6 million Los Angeles mansions and deciding how to spend the $90 million received in donations, and also throwing parties for Joe Biden, who is systematic. Now he's the one that's really destroying black communities. Just look at what's going on right now. But we say black lives when you can. Why say black lives when you can while away your time spending more than $37 million on grants, real estate, consultants, and other expenses. Still, at least that information is now available. Patrisse Cullors, a BLM co-founder, recently dismissed calls to make public BLM finances, describing the prospect of filling out an IRS 990 form as triggering and deeply unsafe. So people giving you money, and everyone want to know where the money is heading to, where the money, their funds are going to. You call that triggering and deeply unsafe? So my question to you is, Patrisse Cullors, what are you hiding? Why do you want to hide where you're spending the funds that people are giving you? Well, of course, it's all too easy to dismiss her disingenuous victim fantasies as farce. But it is not just personal accountability that is missing here. Ideological scrutiny is also effectively avoided, as critics are inevitably accused of being racist. Anyone says anything negative about BLM, they immediately call them racist. Take, for instance, Roland Fryer, the celebrated African-American economist at Harvard. He debunked the persistent narrative that the police kill more blacks than white Americans. For that, as well as his criticisms on education policy, he was effectively canceled by his university. His research was deemed traitorous, and looking at response to the Buffalo shooting from black activists and leftist politicians, It's clear a narrative that trumpets the suffocating impact of racism still prevails. But the facts are the facts, as Professor Fryer explained in Dallas at the week during the weekend. There are racial differences in the use of non-lethal force by police officers, with blacks largely at a disadvantage, but not in officer-involved shootings. In his speech afterwards, Shelby Steele, the author of White Guilt, summarized the implications of this reality. Despite the fact that some racism does still persist, America remains the best country in the world to be black. And I want someone to try to argue differently about that. They all applauded when he said that. It should not have been a sensational remark, and yet it was, because mainstream media not trying to hear anything like that. Everyone in that room understood, as the attack in Buffalo demonstrated, that certain individuals are motivated by a loathing for black people. But this shouldn't define us, let alone the country we live in. For black Americans to progress, we need to cast off today's dependency on white guilt and recognition and support. You don't need recognition and support. We are our own people. We shouldn't have to depend on anyone. What is the way forward if you accept that blacks in America are free? It is to have the courage to live that freedom. It means holding ourselves accountable for our behavior. It means learning to shape our destiny regardless of skin color. And it means ignoring the divisive rhetoric propagated by those such as Patrisse Cullors, Kamala Harris, Ibram X. Kendi. In Texas, the day after the Buffalo attack, a shootout between 5 Hispanic men at a crowded flea market left 2 dead and 3 wounded. Roughly 2 hours later in California, a 68-year-old Asian gunman walked into a Taiwanese church and opened fire, killing 1 person and wounding 5 others. This is what crime looks like in America. It is chaotic, disordered, and irreducible. The skin color of its victims and perpetrators is far from fixed. Racism, then, is not the whole story. In fact, racism has never been the whole story. Yet, faced with an election year and an uphill battle to retain the House and Senate in November, perhaps it's unsurprising that so many Democrats are keen to turn the Buffalo shooting into another George Floyd movement, an excuse to deflect difficult questions and to turn politics into a binary realm of good and evil. That's all they can do. Once again, we're told either you're with us or you're a racist. Even if you're on the side of good, means exploiting the misery of others. And these people don't care about any of that. They just care about progressing their ideology. They care about winning elections. They really don't care about helping black people. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe. And check out democrepublics.com for the latest in news. Until next time, peace. Oh,